Today we wanted to show you how you can achieve an outcome like this, a full pond. This is a pond that used to leak profusely and was never full. It's about 2 weeks since we've actually treated this pond with the Shalex DamIt, which is a dam sealing polymer. We'll show you how we prepared this, and this is really an example of the results that you can expect. So we've used a small canoe, that's why we've got that here in the foreground, to apply the product. As you watch the videos through this segment, you'll see that this area here was actually a shallow pond. There was still water holding in this section, but the sections out around to the other side there, around that little man-made island, were all dry. So the water had basically drained to this section here. And we were called in, the landowner said that they wanted to get some water back in this pond, that they were basically sick of looking at a muddy puddle. And so what we suggested was to apply the DamIt dam sealer over the existing water area to retain the water that's there, but we also worked it into the dry soil, especially through these sections around here, so that this island was basically fully exposed, and you'll see that shortly when we take you back to when we first prepared this. And you can see now the water level has risen significantly. The water's basically come right around that little man-made island there, and the bridge is actually a bridge to the island. We've got wildlife back on the pond. You'll see that there's some tadpoles. We actually saw a little freshwater eel in there a while ago, so that's obviously survived the treatment, even though we only had a muddy puddle here to start with. We've got some ducks, and there was a waterfowl out here before, so you can see that the product itself will settle into the soil very quickly. Yes, there's an initial layer of slime over the surface, but very quickly that'll sink to the bottom, attaches itself to the soil, and you'll see that there's no visible signs of the product being used, other than that we've retained water and we've got a full pond. So if you can spare a little bit of time, watch the rest of this video. We'll take you back to when we first prepared this, what this looked like a couple of weeks ago. We wanted to try and demonstrate the product being applied, but also answer some questions that we're commonly getting from a lot of our customers all over the world. And a question we get asked all the time is, can we apply DamIt dam sealer if we've got a lot of vegetation, if we've got a lot of bulrushes and reeds and algae and all the rest of it? And our response to that is yes, you can, but what you've got to consider is that the product itself it sticks to pretty much anything that it touches, so it's a powder. So if this area was full of vegetation, most of the polymer is not going to get down into the soil structure where your issues are. You want that to freely percolate down into the soil. You don't want it sitting on algae and reeds and bulrushes and all sorts of other vegetation. If you want the product to be most effective, you need to do a little bit of prep work. And I just wanted to show you down in here. What we've actually done is we've raked a lot of the material out of this. So this used to be full of leaves, full of really sort of fluffy material. Now what we're doing is we're getting back to the soil. So you can see that it's mostly clean, and you can see all of this mud cracking that's here. That shows that the soil has actually dried out, it's lost hydration. Once the soil starts cracking, that allows water to pass through. So one of the benefits of using DamIt dam sealer is it will help to keep the soil hydrated, and keeping the soil hydrated keeps the clay and silt swollen, and if they're swollen, they're tight against the particles next to them and water can't push through. So that's one of the reasons that applying to dry soil DamIt dam sealer can be effective, but typically what we'd say is you want to sandwich it between material. If we applied it over here and just left it, chances are if there was really heavy rains it might all wash away into the deeper section, but it can also blow away. It's actually quite a fine powder. So raking it in, it'll certainly get it down into a lot of these cracks and crevices where you want it to be, is a good idea. Or even sandwiching it, having a fine layer of soil or clay over the top and ideally compacted is the best situation. Application method is critical, and one of the things that we say time and time again is don't be tempted to grab a scoop, scoop up the powder and just flick it in from the shore. Because what you end up with is you end up with the larger particles traveling a long distance and the finer dust component won't mix with that. You actually need an even spread. It's like trying to dust a chocolate cake. If you're trying to spin it and throw it too far, you're going to separate the particles. And the magic in this product is that the particles work synergistically. You've got to have some of the finer dust components as well as the larger crystal components all working together. But one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate here is the distance that you can actually throw. So if I stand on the bank here and I broadcast, you can see that there's a dust component. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but there's a finer dust component. The majority of the product is actually falling down here. It's not going out into the middle. Some of the larger components are going out into the middle, but ideally what I want is I want most of this product not falling along the waterline where it's going to be slippery and less useful. I want it in the deeper area where there's greater water pressure. So that's why we're typically recommending that in a dam situation, you'd be in a boat or a small canoe, sitting over the deeper area and applying it back towards the shoreline, and you'll find most of the product lands in the deeper sections, which is where you want it. That's where you've got the higher head pressure. There's more likely to be leaks through the deeper areas. And it's not so important to treat all the way up here, up the edges of the waterline. A lot of people say, oh, my dam doesn't seem to leak until I get to 3/4 full, and then as it comes up, it starts leaking. That doesn't mean that water has found a hole up towards the top of your dam wall and it's now tracking through that hole. It means that what's happened is as the water's risen, there's a lot more weight of that water. That water is pushing down and it's overcome the equilibrium. So a lot of dams will have an equilibrium. They might hold water at 1/4 full, 1/2 full, 3/4 full, but it's difficult to get them at full capacity, and that's where DamIt Dam Sealer can be great. It actually reduces the porosity of the soil, and by reducing the porosity of the soil, it means that the soil's effectively holding a heavier weight of water before it's percolating through the soils. So getting it into the deeper areas is what's important, and we'd recommend that what you try and do, especially if you've got a dam wall, work across the dam wall and really have a good coverage through the deeper areas here, because that's where your water pressure is highest. That's where you want the majority of your product. Don't worry if you don't get it right up the banks. In fact, even if it's only half full, often you don't need to treat higher up. You want it through the water line and through the bottom half of the dam. And when you're measuring and calculating your area, you don't really need to take into consideration all of this area around the edge, because you don't need to apply it there. The product's expensive, you don't want to waste it. You want the best bang for your buck, and doing that, you're applying it through the deeper areas. Now what we wanted to do is apply the product to the area of the pond where there's actually still some water holding. So this is a much deeper section. There's some sections here that are quite deep, but there's also some muddy areas around the edge that are going to be more difficult for us to apply the product to, especially if you're standing around the edges. It can be slippery, it can be dangerous. So using a small canoe, a boat, is ideal, but there are some challenges in terms of working with the product and keeping things dry. This is a perfect conditions. It's nice and still, there's no wind, so where we apply the product, it's going to stay. You don't want a situation where there's a massive wind, it's going to sweep everything across and you'll have one shoreline covered in product and nothing will sort of fall and wet out through the other areas. But just to show you how the product applies, you can see that falling over the surface, and I'm probably getting maybe 1.5 meters, 6 feet sort of spread. That's about the maximum distance that you're going to get when you're applying the product. But ideally you want a nice even coverage. You can see there's a little bit of vegetation here. That's not enough to cause us any issues, but you can see it's already starting to stick to that vegetation. Ideally we want that percolating down into the bottom. So I'm just going to continue. I'll work my way across here and just continue to apply the product until I've got coverage over this whole area. And then given how low this is, I might actually walk around the banks and broadcast into the edges, because there is rain forecast in the next few days. Hopefully that rain event will bring the water level up, and if we've already got the product here, it's active and it's ready and waiting. So you can apply it, and the best time we recommend is immediately after rain, when the dam is at its fullest point and the leak rate is the fastest. That way the product's going to be drawn down into the soil structure really quickly. Some people talk about this, observing this sort of slimy slick for days. Normally this is gone within a few days. Sometimes it can extend for weeks. But we have had situations where people have complained, oh, my pond is full of jelly blubbers. And we know the reason for that is more than likely that they've stood on the edge with a scoop and they've done that. So you can see, looking at that, there's a large amount in a strip, but off to the sides there's nothing. So that's all going to end up as a clump at the bottom. And this is what you want when you're finished. You want to see a slimy slick over the surface like that. If you want it to sink faster, you can get in there and spray it with a hose, or splash the water a little bit, but you will find that this will normally disappear within a day or two. And after a few weeks, most people report that there's no trace of the product whatsoever. So yes, this can be slippery, especially if you're applying it around the edges, but hey, let's face it, mud's slippery anyway. So this isn't going to make it any easier for you. There's a bit of a wash-up procedure you'll see in one of our other videos where we've used a pressure washer to clean the boat, because the stuff does stick. If you can see here, as we're lifting that up, I don't know whether you can see that, it's like a slime that's attaching itself to the rope. And you can see as that develops more, that slime will get bigger and bigger, and there'll be more and more of it, because the product actually swells, absorbs water and attaches to everything. You might want to apply a little bit more through the deeper areas, because the deeper areas are going to be your problem areas, and through the base of any constructed dam wall. That's where we'd recommend applying a heavier dose. We don't recommend this is used in really, really shallow ornamental and fish ponds. Because it swells and absorbs so much, it can turn really, really small ponds to jelly. But you'll see in most cases with decorative ponds and like this and farm dams, there's plenty of water volume. This ends up anchoring at the bottom. It's not going to affect your water quality. Stock can still drink from it. You'll probably find some ducks will come through and play and land in this. It's not going to affect them, and after a few days there'll be no sort of visible signs other than it's binding up all of the clay particles at the bottom and stopping the leaks. And we're pleased to say this is an example of how successfully our products worked. And we had about an inch of rain last week, so this has been just on 2 weeks since we've treated the dam, and you can see we've got an excellent result. The landowner's really, really happy. We've basically got a full dam. It's holding at this higher level. It's a great result, and it shows you what you can do if you have a leak in your dam or pond.